Okay, good evening, everybody. It's Wednesday night, so it's halacha and Tanya. Last week, we started learning the laws of washing for bread. We're discussing the type of vessel that you need. It has to be a complete vessel that could stand, it's not cracked, it's not broken, and you have to wash all the way to the wrist. The proper way of doing it, we learned, is you pick up, if you're right-handed, you pick up the cup in your right hand, give it over to the left, and wash 3 times on the right, and then 3 times on the left. If you're a left-handed person, you pick it up with your left hand, transmit it to the right hand, and then pour 3 times on the left hand, and then 3 times on the right hand. Again, that's what the Tzemach Tzedek holds. Not everybody agrees with that. Many people hold the halacha that even a left-handed person washes his right hand first, but we don't hold like that. We hold a left-handed washes the left-handed person. Okay. Now, what happens is the water got very dirty. It's not dirty. Something fell into a dye fell into the water that changed the color. So if it's something that caused the water to change colors, it's not kosher for washing for bread. If they change by themselves, sometimes it becomes stagnated water and the water turns a little bit yellowish or whatever, that's not an issue. Or if you did something with today it's a whole different world. Today you open the faucet, you have water. Years ago, people had to schlep from the wells and from the rivers. It was a whole different story. It was a very complicated thing to do. So, then it was an issue. Let's say water that you wash dishes with, that water would not be allowed to be used for netilas yadayim, for bread. Anytime you use water for any malacha, anything that you did work with it, or even if you put vessels in the water to cool down, so then the water was used to cool down the vessels, you also wouldn't be able to use it for netilas yadayim, for bread. Why? Because bottom line is, you did malacha with it, you did work with it. Okay, now, or water that's smelly, that it's not fit for a dog. In other words, if it got that bad that even a dog won't drink from it, it's not going to be kosher for netilas yadayim. Okay, we learned you have to check your fingers. Okay, it has to come from a person. Okay, you're not allowed to eat. Next is like this: you're not allowed to eat without washing for bread. And we said some people are very lenient if you hold it you have a glove or hold it in a napkin. Without Rebbe, really, in the Kitzur Shulchan is also very strict that you can't rely on that leniency. Okay, now let me explain a very practical case that comes up. Somebody is about to wash for bread. They need to use the facilities. They need to use the washroom. So they go to the washroom. Now you have to wash after the bathroom, and you also have to wash for bread. So the ideal situation, the proper situation is you wash your hands after the bathroom, not with a vessel. Just wash your hands after the vessel, dry them, say the bracha sheyotzar, and then you rewash your hands for bread. That's the best way of doing it. But if not, you're allowed to technically wash for bread, okay? And then what you do is you make first netilas yadayim and then asher yatzar. Okay, so what happens if you wash for bread and you're not washing separately for after the bathroom? So then the din is, if you use, the best thing is to wash separately. Wash your hands after the bathroom, dry your hands, and then wash again for bread. That's the best way. But if not, and you're going to be using one washing for both, and you have to make sure it goes all the way, proper amount. So then first you make on netilas yadayim, and then you do asher yatzar. Okay? Even though you washed already and made on netilas yadayim, but on netilas yadayim comes first, and then you say asher yatzar.
Rabbi, why wouldn't the best way be to wash like Nagelwasser, say asher yatzar, dry hands, and then wash for bread? Why wouldn't that be the best way?
Because you want to wash your hands in a way that's definitely not good for bread. So once you wash with a keli, you put enough water on one hand. Sometimes that itself is sufficient. So the best thing is not to wash with a keli. Wash your hands, make a shiyatzad, and then after the bathroom up, then you don't need a vessel anyway. You could just wash your hands and make a shiyatzad. Some people do it with a keli, but halachically you don't necessarily have to do it. But I'm saying in this case, you wash your hands regularly, then you wash your bread. Now, what happens in the middle of the meal? Somebody has to go to the bathroom, or they touched parts of the body which are normally concealed. Which means, by the way, it's not uncommon. A person scratches their hair, not just touches their hair, scratches the hair, so then you're touching the scalp. Or you, pardon the expression, you pick your nose, you put your finger inside the ear canal, you touch any part of the body which is normally covered. So because you did that, or you tied your shoes, or you tied your kid's shoe in the middle of the meal, so then you have to wash again without a bracha. You go to the bathroom, and again, that's only if you're planning to eat more bread. If you're not planning to eat more bread, then you don't have to wash again. What for? You're not eating bread. But if you're planning to eat more bread, so then the din is, if you went to the bathroom, you tied your shoes, you touched any part of the body that normally is covered, then you have to wash again without a bracha. Okay? Next thing is like this. And this is, by Chassidim, we're pretty careful about it. In Shulchan Aruch, it says you should be careful about it. A lot of people are lenient about it today. And that is as follows. There's a rule in the Gemara, if you know by the Pesach Seder, before we dip karpas into salt water, we wash your hands like for bread, but without a bracha. Right? You have Kaddish, Urchatz, karpas. Urchatz, the second thing, you wash your hands without a bracha, but you wash it like you would for bread. Why do we wash before karpas? Karpas, you're putting a piece of potato or onion into salt water. What is the big deal? Because the Gemara says, davar shetibule b'mashke, something which is dipped in water, or it's washed and it's wet, halachically, you have to wash it, according to many, many opinions. But because there's a whole argument in halacha about it, so we wash without a bracha. But in other words, like this, if you're eating, or it doesn't have to be even a fruit. If somebody, and by the way, let me first say what the 7 liquids are. Not all things are liquids. For instance, wine, honey, olive oil, milk, dew, blood, okay, and water. Those 7 mashkois, those 7 liquids, you need, if it's dipped or washed in it, you need to either wash your hands from the Tilsi Daim without a bracha, or you need to dry the fruit. Now, for instance, many people you see, they have these biscuits, and they're drinking a cup of coffee or tea. So they'll take the biscuit, dip it into the coffee or the tea, and then they'll eat it. They'll make a mezainis, but they're dipping it into that. I've seen it done many times by people. The problem with that is you're dipping this biscuit, this cracker, whatever it is, into tea and coffee or water. Halachically, the water, not fruit juice that you squeeze an orange and you have fruit juice. Then you wouldn't have to wash for bread because it's not one of the 7 liquids. But if somebody dips a cookie or something in it in tea or coffee, according to halacha, you really have to wash in that cookie without a bracha. Or I'll tell you a more practical example. You're eating an apple, you wash the apple, right? So the din is, if the apple is still wet, you really should wash on the Tilas Yadayim. So what should you do? Dry the apple. If you're eating grapes, so people take a bunch of grapes, they put it into a plate, they wash it, and they empty out the water, but the grapes are still wet. If you're going to eat wet grapes without drying them, according to many opinions in halacha, you have to wash like for bread without a bracha. So what do? You dry the grapes. Now, what happens if it's a food that's normally eaten though with a fork and I'll give you another more examples of this. You take a sour pickle out of a jar. It's wet. And you're going to be taking your fingers. According to halacha, you can't eat that pickle without washing over it without a bracha. So the thing is like this. Foods that are normally eaten with a fork or a knife or a spoon, whatever, they're normally eaten with the utensil, and you're eating it with the utensil, you don't have to wash it. If it's something that you normally eat with the utensil and you're eating it with your hand, then you do have to wash it. So let's say, but something that you normally eat, a crazy example. What happens if your grapes are wet? And you're going to poke a fork into it and eat it with a fork. It's not going to help because grapes are not eaten with a fork. Grapes you eat with your hands. You don't eat an apple with a knife and a fork. You eat an apple with your hand. Even if you cut it in half, but the apple you're holding in your hand. So it's not going to help holding the apple that's wet with a fork or a knife or a spoon or something like that, because it's not something normally eaten with a fork. So let's say somebody is going to be eating herring. Now you take herring out of a jar, the herring is wet, right? It's in liquid. So, I mean, you shouldn't do it anyway. But if somebody's going to be eat a piece of herring with their hands, they're going to need to wash for bread without a bracha. But what happens if they eat it with a fork? Now, normally herring and pickles, you don't eat it with your hands. You eat it with you cut it with a knife and a fork or whatever. So then if you eat it with a knife and a fork, you don't have to wash with it on it.
Is there a connection with dipping the apple in honey on Rosh Hashanah? We do that after washing?
We do it after washing, so you don't have to wash. Otherwise, it would be a question in halacha of doing it. Yeah. There would be a halacha question of that. But again, Rosh Hashanah it might be a relevant Shana Rabbah when you eat apple dipped in honey. But that in the sukkah, that's a whole different story. So again, anything that if you're eating fruits, there's very practical din. People eat wet fruits. People eat wet apples, wet pears. They wash the grapes or cherries or whatever it may be. If you want to eat them without any problem, according to opinions in halacha, what you need to do is you need to dry it. Once it's dried, it's not a problem. But again, it's only if it's wet from one of the 7 liquids, which again, we said before, wine, which includes vinegar from wine, honey, olive oil, milk, dew, blood of an animal, and mayim, and water. Even though blood of an animal you're not allowed to eat, but what happens to eating it for health reasons? But if somebody, let's say, just a crazy example, let's say somebody takes orange juice, which is squeezed from the orange directly, not concentrate, and you pour it into a salad, or lemon juice, okay? People pour lemon juice or lemon, into a salad. So even though the lettuce and those things might be wet, the lemon juice is not one of the 7 liquids. So it wouldn't matter. It's only when you dip the any food, no matter what, a biscuit, it could be anything that you dip into liquid, that's one of the 7 liquids that we mentioned, then you have to wash for bread without a bracha until Sidai.
Even if the part you're holding is dry?
Correct. That's questionable. No, I'm sorry, that's questionable, but you should dry the whole thing better. You should dry the whole grape or plum, peach, whatever you.
I mean, that's what we do with apples when we dip apples in honey. The apple is usually dry.
Yeah, but you're dipping it into honey, so the honey is the liquid.
But the part you're holding, say you're right, yeah.
But you washed anyway for bread.
Right.
Okay. That's as far as the practical dinam of washing for bread that we are learning. Next is moving along. It's the din of B'tzias Sapas, breaking bread, and the bracha of Hametzi. When do we make Hametzi? When do we things like this? Now, generally speaking, I should mention this first. Once you wash for bread and said al netilas yadayim, you're not allowed to talk. If you talk things not pertaining to the meal, you have to wash again without a bracha. You have to be careful. We said before last week, we mentioned, you have to make sure that nobody who didn't wash yet touches your hands while they're wet. Because if they, or you washed your right hand, and then by mistake, your left hand that wasn't washed yet touches your right hand, you have to dry your hands and wash again. If you made a bracha already, you wash again without a bracha. If you didn't make a bracha, you have to. But if somebody touches the right hand that was washed and they didn't wash yet, you have to wash again. So you have to be careful that nobody should touch your hands. You also have to be careful not to talk between washing for bread and Hametzi. But you're allowed to answer Amen on any bracha that somebody makes. So I'll give you a very practical example. You washed first. You said on the netilas yadayim. Okay, you're going back to the table, and somebody else is washing, and they make a bracha on netilas yadayim out loud. So the din is you're allowed to answer Amen, even though you're not allowed to talk, but you're allowed to answer Amen on all brachas. If somebody is making Hametzi, and you washed and didn't make Hametzi yet, you're allowed to say Amen on any bracha. Okay? Ideally, a person should wash in close proximity to the place where they're going to be making Hametzi. Preferably, it should be within 11 ames, is let's say 22 feet. Should preferably be, no, here it says 22 ames, 44, other places 11. But the bottom line is you should try to wash in close proximity to the place where you're going to be making Hametzi, because then you have less of a hefsek and less of a problem that way. But if it's taken longer, it doesn't matter. You don't have to wash again. Well, let's say in a scenario when you have, let's say, 20 people at your meal and everybody is washing. So the guy who washes first might have to wait 5 minutes until everybody finishes washing. That doesn't matter as long as you don't talk. And just being quiet is not going to be a problem, with having to wash again. Now, today, everything is sliced bread and everything like that. But years ago, let me explain another interesting thing. By the Goyim, there's an expression, breaking bread. You break bread. Where does it come from? Because the expression in the Gemara and in halacha is what's called B'tzias Hapas. Beitzeya. B'tzias Hapas literally means breaking bread. That's what it means. That's where the expression in English came. We break bread. What do you mean breaking bread? What do you break bread? You cut bread. You break bread. So it says in halacha the following. And again, this is only if you're eating a whole roll or a whole challah or something complete. Ideally, you make a bracha on something which is whole, complete. We'll learn that when we get more into the dinam of brachas. When you make a bracha on an apple, you should make it on a whole apple. Unless if you have to check it for worms, then you have no choice, because then you'll make a bracha and then you won't be able to eat the apple. You'll have a bracha in vain. But generally speaking, whenever you eat something and it's whole, you should make a bracha on the whole, something which is whole, complete. So now you have, and yet there's another din. We want to minimize the separation between the bracha and the actual eating. We want to minimize that too. So how you can reconcile these two things? Because if you have a whole roll and then you're going to make a bracha when it's whole, and then you're going to start cutting it, it's going to take a short period of time until you eat it. I mean, it's not a long period of time, but it's still taking time. So what do? So halacha says like this: during the week, you start making the bracha. You have a roll. Okay, it's a whole roll. So you start making a bracha when the roll is complete. And while you're making the bracha, you're cutting into the roll. And then you leave over a little bit at the end that you don't cut. And then when you finish the bracha, you break the bread. That's what the expression betzia sapat, breaking bread. You break it with your hand, and then you dip it into salt, like we'll learn, and then you eat it. That is the proper way. Nowadays we have sliced everything. So most people, you don't have this concept of a whole thing. It's a whole slice, but it's not a whole challah, it's not a whole bread, it's not a whole roll. But nevertheless, now what do you do on Shabbos? Shabbos, you need to have lechem mishra. You need to be complete. You can't cut in the middle. But that's one of the reasons why before, if you notice, on Friday night and Shabbos day, we make a little mark on the bread. We don't cut into it. We make a mark as if to show that's the place I'm going to be cutting. And then we make hamaitzi, and then we start cutting in that place that we made the mark. So that minimizes, we're showing that we're minimizing the separation between the actual bracha and the actual eating. So you have both things. Okay, so you have the making a bracha on something complete, plus you're also able to make a bracha as close as possible to do it. Now, l'chatchila, when you make a bracha, you should make a bracha on the best part of the bread. The best part of the bread. Because again, the respect for a bracha is to make it on something complete, something respectable. What is the best part of the bread? So the Gemara says, which basically, as we would call it, the crust. The crust is where it's baked bread, and that's where you cut it, because that's what holds the bread together. So therefore, ideally, now there's also a custom, also brought down in halacha, the end, mamish, the end of the bread, or the challah, if you eat it, it's what's called kosher l'shikcha. It's going to make you forget your learning. So what do? You don't eat that little piece at the end. You just cut a little piece off at the end. But otherwise, you eat from the piece of the bread where the crust is. That's the ideal thing. Now, what happens, he says, if somebody's old, they don't have teeth, and it's hard for them to eat the crust, so then it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because they're not going to eat the hard, so you eat the soft. Okay, that's the best place to cut it. Okay, we try to cut it as soon as possible. Don't cut it before the bracha. Okay, now, by the way, this is interesting. What happens when a person cuts the bread? The one that makes the bracha, like this applies more Shabbos, the one that makes the bracha has to bite first into the bread before anybody else bites. Nobody else is allowed to bite into if one guy's making hamaitzi for everybody, you're not allowed to bite into the bread before the guy that made the bracha bites it. Okay, now by us, the custom is everybody makes their own hamaitzi anyway. But I'm saying if you're in a situation in halacha where one person is making the bracha for everybody, so then nobody is allowed to, therefore the custom doesn't look necessarily very profound etiquette, but when your guy's slicing bread for a lot of people at the Shabbos table, what he does is he cuts a slice, takes it, puts it into salt, bites it, and then he continues cutting because he has to be the first one. He made the bracha. He should minimize the separation between his bracha and his eating, and also nobody else is allowed to eat anyway until he makes the actual bracha. Okay, now you shouldn't when you're cutting bread, I mean, again, this doesn't apply. It applies when you cut challah. You shouldn't cut a very tiny piece because then it looks like you're cheap. You shouldn't cut a very big piece because then you look like probably like a karabta, means a fresser. In other words, the etiquette is don't look cheap, don't be cheap, and don't be a fresser. So you cut an average size piece that's not too cheap and not too fresserized, and that's the way to do it. But that's only, okay, that's only when you're eating alone. Otherwise, you should cut a piece, at least a half a kazayas, like at least a half an ounce. Okay, Shabbos, we're not learning now. Okay. Now, another very important thing is like this. If you're eating a piece of bread, or you're eating an apple, you're eating anything, and people should be more careful with this. The thing you're making the bracha on, you hold in your right hand. If you're left-handed, you hold it in your left hand. But a person always, when you're making a bracha on food, whether it's food or drink, by the way, you're drinking a cup of coffee or tea or soda, whatever, you should hold it in your right hand when you make a bracha. In other words, it shouldn't be just left on the table. You should hold it when you make the bracha to show this is when I'm making the bracha on. And if you're a right-handed person, you're supposed to hold it in your right hand because right is more prominent than left. And that's the bracha that you're still supposed to do. Now, coming back to bread for a second, is another interesting thing that people are unaware of for whatever reason. And that is as follows. When you make the bracha hameitzi, even if you're taking a small piece of bread, halacha says you should hold the bread with all 10 fingers. You should eat the bread, hold the bread with all 10 fingers. Why? It's appropriate to do it that way because I'm not going to enumerate them all. From the time you plow the field until you eat the bread, there's 10 mitzvahs in the Torah that are connected to it. For instance, you can't plow with your ox and donkey together. You're not to kalayim, leket, chik, I mean, all the mitzvahs that you have. And that's why Chazal tell us the bracha of Hameitzi has 10 words in it. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech ha'olam hameitzi lechem min ha'aretz. Why does the bracha, why when Anshe Knesset Hagedolah made the bracha of Hameitzi, did they make sure there were 10 words in the pasuk, in the bracha? Because there are 10 mitzvahs connected to it. Not only that, it says, in the pasuk we say in Ashrei, everybody is looking to you, and you give them food in the proper times. 10 words in the pasuk. The pasuk that says chitos, eretz, chitos, the 7 species, 10 words in the pasuk. So therefore, the cost is preferred. It's not you don't you didn't do a sin, but it's preferred. The proper way is when you make that. By the way, that's only for bread. If you eat a cookie, you don't need to hold in both hands. And this is, by the way, only when you make the bracha. When you make the bracha of Hameitzi, it says even if it's a slice of bread, no matter what it is, you hold it with all 10 fingers. But any object that you're making the bracha on should be held in the right hand. Okay, when you say the name, you pick up the bread a little bit. You should have a kavana. Okay. Now you're not allowed to have a separation between the eating and between the bracha and the eating. If I make hameitzi lechem min ha'aretz, and before I take a bite, somebody's washing for bread, and they said al netilas yadayim, you're not allowed to answer amen. Between washing and making a bracha, you can answer amen on all brachas. But if you made a bracha between the bracha and the eating, you're not allowed to have any separation whatsoever, because if not, you might have to say the bracha again. Okay, that's it for today. In halacha, we're going to go to Tanya now, starting a very interesting parak in Tanya.